And for the Israeli perspective, I'd like to bring in Amir Avivi, a retired brigadier general. Thank you so much for being with us here on France 24, sir.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Now, why did Netanyahu drag his feet when it came to this ceasefire? You know, it took 4 phone calls from his greatest Western ally, Joe Biden, the US president, for this to happen. And of course, we know that 12 Israeli lives were lost. Isn't that 12 too many?
First of all, every life is too many. As you said before, Hamas started the war, and we had to react and defend the people of Israel. I think from a professional point of view, looking at the operation, that this operation on behalf of the Israeli Defense Forces will go down in history as one of the most precise, accurate, almost surgical operation an army has ever done. And it was amazing to see, for example, how the IDF can send 150 planes to attack the infrastructure of the terror tunnels called the metro, hit very hard, destroy 100 kilometers of terror tunnels, and yet minimize really to a minimum collateral damage. I must say that most of the civilians that were killed, unfortunately, in Gaza, that's why Hamas itself, many of the rockets Hamas shot on Israeli towns.
Oh, the 66 children. The 66 children were Hamas, is that right?
Yeah, I think that most of the casualties, unfortunately, that were in Gaza were hit by Hamas rockets. Also, we have to remember that Hamas is basically doing a double war crime. He's hiding behind his own society. He's shooting from dense civilian areas, and he's targeting Israeli citizens.
Amir Avivi, I have very different information to you there, saying most of those children and women were killed by Hamas, but it's okay. What you mentioned in terms of removing Hamas infrastructure and their operatives is something that we have almost verbatim heard from Netanyahu. We heard it from him in the aftermath of the previous flare-up, and the one before that. So we keep hearing this, and yet, as we've seen, Hamas continues to survive. And we heard in that report from our correspondent, Ismail Haniyeh, saying this war is not over.
Yes, it's true. I also think that it's not over. I mean, when we disengaged from Gaza, we basically connected Gaza to Egypt. And through this border, it's only 15 kilometers border, endless amount of munition, of know-how, of terrorists, of capabilities is flowing all the time into Gaza. So basically, when we achieve quiet for quiet, and then you see from 2014 to today, a relatively quiet time, this time was used by Hamas to build huge capabilities, tens of thousands of rockets, hundreds of kilometers of tunnels, anti-tank missiles, drones, and so on. And now we need to change that. We cannot let Hamas gain these capabilities again. We also need to target Hamas leaders who commanded shooting 4,000 rockets on the people of Israel. So this is not over. We will need to deal with it. And basically, the way I see it from a military point of view, this needs to look much like what we're doing in Syria. When there is something that endangers us, we go and hit it. We don't wait.
You do
and
speak
we need to treat Hamas differently.
You do speak about this military operation with an immense sense of pride, I sense. But isn't the weapons infrastructure massively disproportionate anyway? We know that the Gaza rockets are mostly handmade weapons in comparison to Israel's military might, which receives $3.3 billion annually in foreign military financing. So it makes sense that on one side you had over 200 people dead, and on the other, unfortunately, only 12.
Well, are we to blame for being capable, for being able to defend our people? The Hamas is getting billions of dollars from Iran. Just the tunnel infrastructure cost Hamas $3.5 billion. An organization, an army, not an organization, a terror army that has about 30,000 rockets. Tell me which country in Europe possesses 30,000 rockets. And I'll tell you the answer, none. This is a huge army. It's a terror army. And it's not some small terrorists that, you know, in the Israeli big army.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a big threat.
Yeah, you said it's a big threat. You did this to defend yourselves. But do you see blocking off Damascus Gate at the beginning, the attempted eviction of Palestinian families in Sheikh Jarrah, the violence at Al-Aqsa Mosque against worshippers? Are you essentially poking the bear there, or are you defending yourself? They're very different notions here.
Well, I think this is a blood label, and I'll tell you how things work. There is a strategic decision taken 2 weeks ago by Abu Mazen and Hamas to start a war. Now, the way it goes is that immediately they invent a blood label talking about the Temple Mount. Israel has an interest to keep
It's not a creation. We saw that with our own eyes, sir. It's not a creation of any sort.
Let me explain. I know things on the ground. Basically, what they do, they send people to do riots on the mountain. Now, when people go to a place where you are supposed to pray and start throwing Molotov bottles and rocks on everybody, of course, you need to bring in the police in order to bring law and order. Where exactly in Europe you have a place of prayer?
I'm going to have to cut you there because we're running out of time, and I want to quickly address a few other things, and more briefly, if you can respond. You know, you said Hamas created this and they were at the helm of this conflict kicking off. Everything that I mentioned with Al-Aqsa, with Sheikh Jarrah were excuses. Yet, interestingly, this conflict has given none other than Netanyahu a political lifeline. You know, his popularity rating has gone up. He has been dubbed Mr. Security by Israeli media outlets. So who has this really played into the hands of?
You are talking to a general, not a politician. I can tell you that I was aide-de-camp of the chief of staff.
General, isn't there collaboration between the prime minister and the military?
I think that this is a terrible thing to say. I think that the prime minister in no way collaborates with the terrorists. It happened to be that they started shooting. I know exactly why, because Abu Mazen decided to stop the elections, and they needed to shift attention from the fact that the Palestinians are ruled by terrorists and by tyrants that don't do elections.
I think you misunderstood me. I meant about, I'm sorry, I think you misunderstood me. What I meant was collaboration between Netanyahu and the military. But we just have 1 minute, so I'm going to pose one question to you, and hopefully we can leave it there. You know, at the moment, as you and I are speaking, there's a very fragile truce in place. No one is, of course, under the impression that it will last. What's next? More violence, potentially, from what you're saying?
Well, yeah, I must tell you that I'm not really optimistic, because the way we need to deal with Hamas threat won't be the same way before, and we'll need to continue targeting their capabilities and also their leadership. I'm very, very worried about what's going on inside Israel. The fact that there is a certain amount of Islamistic jihadists also inside Israel that are rioting, and this is something we need to take care of. And by the way, I'm also very worried about what's going on with Iran. There is the Iran deal. They might get a lot of money now if sanctions are relieved. And I think that this might completely destabilize the Middle East. So yes, I'm not very optimistic, and I think we need to be very alert about what's going on around us.
Well, from this perspective, the revival of the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, would make the region safer because it leads to disarmament. On that note, Amir, Avivi, I'd like to really thank you for taking the time to speak to us here on France 24.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much.